So let's talk about my toolbox. My toolbox, my essential toolbox is this, and just this. I say just this. Is this a lot? I don't think this is a lot. Okay. So I'm not kidding myself. I have other tools. I have an entire room behind me that's my work room that's full of stuff. But in terms of if I was to go traveling, if I'm leaving the house, if you set me on a desert island, provided you gave me a steady stream of yarn, I think this is all I would ever need to knit most of what I ever want to knit. It's a bold claim, but I think it's true. This is what I have run with for some years now. So some of you may recognize this. This is a Knit Pro, ChiaoGoo Knit Pro do sets too, so to higher, lots of brands do. This is a ChiaoGoo set case. So it was originally just one set. It was originally the interchangeable small set, but then I have added 2 other sets to it. Now, it can take lots of needles. I am really kind of particular. I tend to knit double knit and finer almost always. It's very rare for me to knit bulky yarns. So I don't really use needles above about 5 mil. So this other side is supposed to house 5.5 to 10, and I don't own them. I literally don't own them because I just hardly ever knit there. On the occasions that I do, I have a lot of other needles. I kind of generally go and find one. I might have the odd fixed circular lying around for those, but most of the time, this is where I knit. So as long as you're giving me double knit or 4-ply or finer on my desert island, I'm good to go forever. So I have the standard sized tips, which is 5 inches. And then I have underneath those, I've popped in a set of 4-inch tips. And that gives me 5-inch and 4-inch from 2.75 through to 5 mil. I did add in the 3 mil tips that you can buy as well, which does me lace weight and 4-ply and sport weight and double knit, and I'm happy. It allows me to knit shawls and sweaters and hats on the wee short 4-inch with a 20 centimetre, and then I magic loop everything smaller than 40 centimetres. So my sleeves and my socks, I'm a magic looper, devoted. So this covers everything pretty much. The exception in the 3rd set that I added was sometimes I like to work with needles under 2.75 millimetre. So I added in the mini 5-inch set, which is 1.5 to 2.5, and it's just a little sleeve because those needle tips are so fine, and I just house that in the front pocket. So that's my 3 sets. All the cables are in the front here, so it's 3 sets of needles. And then I stuff as many things as I can in here as well. And then the overflow goes into here. So the mini set came with a little tool case, which houses like the cable connectors and the pins and the stoppers that you use for your interchangeable needles, all those fun little bits and pieces. So I just added in the small accessories as well, and everything just closes up in that. So that lives in here. As I said, all the cables, and I have extras. All the cables, seriously, all the cables, lots and lots of cables. You can never have too many cables, right? I only have so many cables because I have so many projects, but anyway. So that's all the functional needle bits that I think I need. And then it comes with a needle gauge, but I have a 2nd needle gauge because belt and braces? No, because this gauge only goes down to 2.75. This goes a wee bit lower. They don't take up much room. They're kind of handy rulers. Sometimes somebody wants one and I can lend one out. I just have extras. I don't know why. Tape measure. This is not my favorite tape measure. I can never find a tape measure anyway, but this tape measure lives in here because it's little, but it's not my favorite. It's actually, some of you may recognize it. If you've ever been in a VP club, you might have got this from years ago. It's a metal one. I don't love the metal ones. You can see this one has a bit of a kink in it, and they don't sit as flat on fabric. So these aren't my favorites, but it absolutely works. My favorites are more the soft kind because they follow the contour of fabric well. As long as it has inches and centimeters, I'm kind of happy. This one's really cute because it's a panda. So this is one of my favorites, but he's too big to fit in my case, so he kind of lives elsewhere. But you've got to have a tape measure. Tape measures are really cheap. If you're ever on my website and you think, oh, if I just spend a few dollars more, I get free shipping, tape measure. Seriously, $3.50. If it's the difference between paying $6.50 in shipping and $3.50 for a tape measure, you're literally saving money. Get a tape measure, because I must have a dozen and I can only ever find one. They're everywhere and yet nowhere, all at the same time. Scissors. I love me some scissors. You might have noticed when I open this, I have a pair of stalky embroidery scissors hiding in there. So they're great. I love those. I also have a little pair of mini scissors. These are on my website, but sadly they're out of stock and I can't get them from the distributor at the moment. As soon as I can, I will get them back in because they're brilliant. There are lots of these mini scissors lying around. I've stocked plenty over the years, and quite a lot of them honestly aren't that good at cutting. They look cute, they're nice in a travel size, but you kind of actually have to really hack at a bit of yarn to make them work. These are sharp. These are really sharp. They're great, and the handles are actually big enough that you can use them fairly effectively. The little cover is attached so you can't lose it, and it's rubber, so they're really, really safe. So they don't stab through your bag and they don't stab you. So I really like them, but yeah, sadly at the moment I don't have any. But if you see them elsewhere, I would recommend that you snap them up because they're really, really useful. So that's almost everything that sits in the front of my pouch, and it just fits. If I shoehorn it all in, it just fits. The additional thing I have in there is this highlighter tape. Highlighter tape is not a knitting tool per se. It's like a stationery product, but oh, it's so good for knitting. It's so good for knitting. It has lots of uses, and it's if you know what washi tape is, it's a little bit like that, but it's transparent. It's literally like a highlighter. It's like a strip of highlighter. It's low tack, so you can stick it to things and then remove it. It's smooth. It's not paper. It's not paper like a washi tape. And it's ideal for marking charts and the like, or for marking where you are in a pattern. It goes on and comes off without lifting anything. And you can move it around. And one piece, it's not like you stick a piece on and then you need a new piece for the next row. No, not at all. You stick a piece on where you need it, and then you just keep moving it. And one piece will do you an entire repeat. Like this chart is 64 rows. It'll do the entire chart, probably more than once. In fact, I imagine more than once. I don't know if it's going to do it the 9 times I have to do this chart, but it certainly lasts a really long time. Now, I don't stick it on so that I'm highlighting the row that I'm working. The row that I'm working is the row just above it. And what it does for me is it provides a really nice line under the row that my eye needs to follow, but I can see through it to see what was on the row below. And if you're the kind of person who reads your knitting, which I do, I need to see what's on the row below to know that I'm in the right place on this row. So this allows me to see through, but allows my eye to very easily settle on the row that I should be working. And then you get to the end of the row and you move it up. I'm quite a lazy knitter. I'm a very lazy knitter. I'm a very lazy person in many respects. I don't like to have to do complicated things. And I do have one of those apps on your iPad or whatever that tracks charts. And it is great. It is great at what it does. But here's the thing. I have to make sure my iPad's charged, or I have to make sure that I've got it connected to the PowerPoint somehow. I have to remember my login, which is weird, but my iPad doesn't get used that often. I have to potentially make sure I've got a Wi-Fi connection. I have to keep unlocking it, or I have to lock it so that it is always on, but then it drains the battery really fast. There's a lot. It's heavy. My iPad's quite heavy. It's quite bulky, and then I feel bad about throwing it in my knitting bag because I might break it and it's expensive. So weirdly, paper is kind of my friend, and my paper just gets shoved in my bag. It's light, it's easy to carry, and a bit of highlighter tape does the same job that the fancy app does. It's slightly more time consuming to move from row to row because I have to peel it off and put it on the next row, but it's not much more time consuming. And yeah, for me, this is where I keep settling back to. So highlighter tape is amazing. You can also write on highlighter tape. So if you're working in a pattern out of a book, and you don't want to write notes in your book, which is very understandable, you can write on the highlighter tape and stick it in your book, and it's fine. So it's a bit like a post-it note. You can use it as a bookmark in your book. You can follow a chart in the book without destroying the page. It also sticks to your knitting. So you can write the needle size that you've used for a swatch, stick it on your knitting. It's not permanent, as in you can easily peel it off. So if you're going to stick it in a bag, I would fold it up with that on the inside, but it's not going to shake off either. So it's useful for lots of things. It comes in a range of colours. So you can have a colour that suits you and your taste. This reel is really old. I've had it for years and years and years, and you can see I'm almost finished with it. A full roll is more like this. A full roll is over 18 meters. So one of these lasts you years. And I happily lend my, well, not lend it, I don't want a bag. I happily give out bits to people. It's something that it just lasts and lasts and lasts. And I find really, really useful. So that's everything that's in my actual pouch, the actual knit case. And then I have this little case here. And I've got quite a few of these. And again, if you've ever been in a club, you may have one, because a couple of clubs years ago, I've given these out. They generally had like knit bits or something written on the cover. It's not a case you can open just by pulling on the lid. It has a little lever. So I know that I can literally, and I do this, chuck it into my bag and things don't fall out. You can find them in various places. So it comes with a lot of little dividers in it, and those dividers are movable except for these two. All the others are movable, and I tend to take all the top ones out, and I've taken one out here. Sometimes I leave that in. It depends what I want to put in here. And it means I can put long things in here as well as have compartments for stitch markers. So what's in here? More scissors. These are the Laces thread snips. If you are the kind of person who doesn't really like plastic stuff, these are old school, robust, metal, very sharp thread snips. Laces is a brand that everything they do is really good quality. I've never had an issue with anything they do, but their packaging is like deeply unsexy. Their branding is very, very simplistic. It's sort of 1973, almost on a typewriter kind of branding, but everything they do is great. And this is a classic example. This is a pretty simple little tool, but this is a nice, robust version of that tool and very sharp. It comes with a funny little flimsy case, which I don't like and didn't keep for my one. If you can't, the downside with this is you can't have this floating in your bag. So you either need to put it in a case of some description, or it stores beautifully in here. So it's nice and safe in this toolkit. So that's the rundown of scissors. I have 3 pairs. Why I like scissors? I don't know. I have lots of scissors. Cool. Also in that top stretch, handy tools. Love handy tools. It has just occurred to me that I hope none of you are writing this down. You'll get a recording of this later, so you don't need to write stuff down if you don't want to. And also there is actually a handout. You might have seen below, there's a wee thing that says you can download the handout. So don't write anything down. The handout has all the details, and you can play this back if you missed something very specific. But the handout has links to everything and details everything I cover. So just keep knitting or patting the cat or having a cup of tea. Don't worry about writing things down. Handy tools. Handy tools, let me get that on the dark. Can you see that one end is a crochet hook and one hand is like a knitting needle, standard. And I have sold literally thousands of these, I'm sure, just gallons of them. Literally people come up to me at events and buy a dozen at a time. They're great gifts for knitters, but they're also the sort of thing you want one in every bag that you've got going. They're just so useful. The crochet hook end I use for picking up a drop stitch, or sometimes things happen and you need to kind of second pair of hands and weird manipulation. That's for that. If you haven't got a cable needle on you, this end works really well as a cable needle. You can slide stitches right off it if you need to, but it just hangs there like a regular old cable needle. If I drop a stitch, I can pick it up with the hook, and then I use the sharp end and just kind of feed it through my knitting to hold it until I've sorted all my stuff out. It's just really useful for stitch manipulation. There's kind of weird occasions when you want one, and I'd never be without one of these. I really like them. They, again, are really cheap. I think like $4. It does say on, it says on the website, but yeah, they're cheap as, and they come in a range of colours. And although I don't let you specifically choose the colour, because I don't get to choose them when I buy them, and if you tell me you want a blue one, and I've got a blue one, you'll get a blue one. They're cute, great stocking stuffer if you've got a knitter in the family. Cute, easy to store, useful. Love them. And they're the sort of tool that, like, when we're out about, has anyone got a handy tool? Like, the knitters I know love them. Really, really handy. I'm not a cable needle user. I did say you can use this as a cable needle if you need to. You absolutely can. I'm not a cable needle user, generally speaking. So for most cables, I cable without a cable needle. But weirdly or not, I have several cable needles in my kit. This is one of those instances of something in my kit I have for other people. It's quite common when you're out at knit night, or you're out at a class, or you're out at a social gathering of knitters, somebody says, has anybody got a cable needle? I literally have cable needles in my kit, so I can lend out cable needles. They're not fancy cable needles. They're just little sticks. They're actually old Knit Pro ones. I don't stock this kind because they're not what people who do use cable needles tend to prefer. But like, if somebody walks off with one of these, I don't care. You know, I've lost nothing, but it means I've got something to lend to people. And those are the ones that fit in my kit. So if you think about, this is probably the most preferred shape of cable needle that I sell, the J hooks. But that doesn't fit in my kit, unfortunately, and the little sticks do. So that is the reason that I have that kind of cable needle and why it's in my kit. Another thing that's in my kit that really doesn't have that much to do with knitting, but for some reason I'm slightly obsessed with safety pins. They're in everything. They're in my luggage, they're in my handbag, and they're in my knit kit. And yeah, you can use safety pins to hold a few stitches sometimes, but I think this is just a safety net for me. I somehow feel better in the world if there's a safety pin around me. I've had very few malfunction incidences where I've needed a safety pin in life, but apparently I can't let them go. So I have random safety pins sitting in my kit. I have a little pin. Any of you who use interchangeable needles know you need a wee pin to tighten them. That's a random Knit Pro one. I have some Knit Pro needles. I don't use them as a matter of course, but their pins are actually quite tidy and elegant, so I keep those. I have darning needles. Blunt tipped, good old standard darning needles. Okay, mine are straight. I don't seam a lot of garments. I knit mostly seamless, so this is the kind I prefer for weaving in ends. This is a very old one, and again, people often ask to borrow these, so even if you're not planning to weave in ends, I find it's useful to have one lying around. If you are the kind of person who seams up, then you might prefer bent tip needles. The one thing you should do is match the needle size to the yarn you're using. You don't really want to be using a super big one on a fine yarn. So because I knit mostly 4-ply and DK and finer, this is kind of the right size for those yarns. If I was knitting chunkier yarns, then I would look at a chunkier needle to enable that to happen. So if you knit a variety, you might want a range of sizes. I find this size does mostly what I want. The short one is much better than the long one, in my opinion, especially if you're weaving in ends. You don't really want a super long needle. So that's everything that lives in that top section, all the long things as such. And then the rest of my kit is basically stitch markers, but stitch markers are really important to me. So I'm really fussy about stitch markers, very fussy. There are some beautiful stitch markers in the world and I admire them. They're really pretty. I own quite a lot of them. I never want to use them. I just don't. I want to use plain rings, and I want my plain rings to match my needles. So these are my most commonly used stitch markers, 2 sizes. So this is a 3mm needle. This little stitch marker here is what I use on pretty 4-ply and under, really. So it'll fit on a 3.75mm needle and down. They're beautifully smooth. They move nicely. There's no dangly thing to get in my road. Larger yarns, so my DKs and worsteds, I tend to knit with this size, which fits those larger needle tips. Okay. Why do I like super minimal? Well, I don't want them to snag. The dangly things, like danglies are really pretty, but in my experience, they're always on the wrong side of the knitting when I get to them and I have to flip them over, or I manage to knit them into my knitting because I drag a piece of yarn across and they get stuck. And that's just faff that I don't need in my life, so I don't do that. I don't like big, heavy markers because they tend to move my needles around. I just like things simple. And these are soldered closed rings, so there's no gap in them to catch a yarn. Sometimes you get jump rings and people are like, oh, you can use these. Jump rings, if they're not soldered closed, have little gaps, and it doesn't matter how tightly closed they are, that gap finds yarn, and that drives me batty. So none of that. And then why do I match them to the size of the yarn? Because a stitch marker sits between stitches. In your knitting, it sits between two stitches and you knit around it. So yarn from this stitch travels across your stitch marker to the next stitch. If your stitch marker is really bulky, you get a little gauge looseness at that point because the yarn has to stretch further to get between the two stitches around the stitch marker than it would if it was just going from stitch to stitch. By keeping your stitch marker really minimal and thin, you reduce the amount of extra yarn there and thereby reduce any kind of weird little gauge spot you might have. And we tend to mark areas where we need to increase or decrease, and those areas can be a wee bit loosey-goosey anyway because of the nature of what we're doing. I'm not going to exacerbate the problem with a really bulky marker. So I like these because they are the least interfering. You can get plastic rings. I've got little rubber rings even. They're all fine. The plastic ones are quite deep. So this way, I don't know that you probably can't see that, but this way, the depth of the rubber and the plastic is quite long compared to the metal. So again, you're getting an extra bulk that you don't need and don't necessarily want between stitches to get around. So that's why I'm principally these. But the rubber ones are in my kit because metal ones move super easy on needles. The rubber ones don't move as freely, which means that if you are working maybe with a really light yarn or something where you want a bit more control over it, you actually want a bit more friction on the needle so that things don't kind of run out of control, then sometimes I find the rubber one quite useful. They're soft and squishy. They, again, don't catch anything. These are literally just like little rubber O-rings. I don't have any in stock at the moment, but you can probably find similar products, maybe even, I don't know. Well, I guess if they're mechanical automotive type stuff, they're probably black. But I think maybe beading supply places sometimes have these. They're just really simple, work really well. So that's for stitch markers between things that slide on the needle, that sit and slide with your knitting. For stitch markers that mark rows or that you need to move in and out of places, you need something that locks and unlocks. The classic type are these plastic little ones. They're little little lockable markers. But the type I prefer are metal. Try and find one that will show up. Little metal ones. I call these knitters safety pins, but they're really lockable markers. Why? So the plastic ones are fun and they're nice and bright and they're light, and I find them quite useful for marking the right side of something. But the plastic fatigues over time, so especially the cheaper ones tend to break here when you're doing them up and undoing them, they tend to snap. So some are better than others. The Knit Pro ones aren't too bad. These ones I've had for a while. They tend to last a bit better. But again, they are a bit bulkier on the needle, especially if you need to use them between stitches. The plastic is way bulkier than the metal, so it's the same issue that we were talking about before. And metal's just, I don't know, it just lasts. Like, it's not going to perish like the plastic is. You can get them in different colours. I stock them in kind of metal colours, so like silver and rose gold and coppery type colours. You can get them in primary colours, but the primary colour ones are painted, and that's a coating on the metal. And I personally don't like those because they're not as slick. It's kind of it produces a friction that I don't personally like, and it makes them a bit thicker. So especially when I'm using very fine yarns, I like these because they are really, really thin and minimal and don't interfere too much. So that's everything that is in my kit. And that's pretty much all I need. There isn't much that I couldn't knit. If you put me on a desert island, as long as you give me a supply of yarn, and a supply of yarn that is DK and under, then I think I can knit pretty much anything I wanted to with these. I can socks, sleeves, hats, garments, blankets. I'm sorted. So that's my core. And this, if I'm traveling, this goes in my suitcase. These two things go in my suitcase. If I'm going to knit night, these go in my project bag. There are a couple of concessions I make for travel. I sometimes carry a nostopine, which is a fancy stick that enables you to wind balls. There's more information on that on your handout. And I carry a headlamp because lighting away from your home is often a very hit and miss thing. And these are just little LED headlamps, goes on your head. It can be angled down to face your work, and I look ridiculous, but I can see my knitting. And they are, you'll find them at the warehouse, at Kmart. This is a Kmart one. The outdoor places have them, but they probably ask a bit more money from them. They're really useful. And also, we have one by the back door because they're great for when you need to go out to the bins or get some firewood in the middle of winter, in the middle of the night. So that's my two extras if I'm traveling. But at home and to knit night and stuff, this is my kit. Yay. Hopefully some of that was new to you, or maybe it completely matches your kit and you're like, yeah, she's a sensible woman. I am.